Combat is your art, and mastering the medium is essential to becoming an Absolver. Upon arriving in Adal, all prospects have a core combat style and an initial combat deck. On their path to absolution, prospects will learn new possibilities and mix them to create their own unique method of fighting. One of 3 combat styles are chosen at the beginning of your journey, but other styles exist in the world of Absolver. Each combat style improves specific character attributes and comes with its own unique special ability. Balanced and powerful, with the Forsaken style, prospects can parry enemy attacks, briefly stunning their opponent. Strong and resistant, practitioners of the cult method can absorb hits without being stunned or pushed back, and regain lost health if the counterattack is successful. The students of the Windfall combat style will have greater dexterity and will. They can avoid enemy attacks, leaving their enemies open to a powerful counter. The combat deck is the list of attacks that a prospect can use when fighting. These attacks are divided between 4 different stances, which represent the prospect's orientation relative to their target. In each stance, different attacks are available. Some attacks will naturally flow from one stance to another. Other attacks will stay in the same stance. Regardless, each move will always chain fluidly with one another, effortlessly shifting from stance to stance without interruption. The combat deck is fully customizable, allowing one to define their way of fighting and become unpredictable. In each of the 4 stances, prospects will choose a sequence of attacks and an alternative attack. Alternative attacks can be used at any time to break a sequence and bring the prospect in another stance. Both sequences and alternative attacks can be chained fluidly without interruption. To give more possibilities, new attacks can be unlocked by fighting against any kind of opponent, from the newest prospect to the strongest Absolver. Besides this, prospects can learn other combat styles by choosing a mentor and staying loyal to him or her. Prospects can choose mentors as they meet in the world. Through their loyalty, prospects can learn additional combat styles and use their mentor's combat deck. Steel yourself, dear prospect. Combat instincts may come natural, but refining your combat style and combat deck is key to both basic survival and victory in the lost lands of Adal.
Hi, my name is Pierre Tarnaud. I'm Creative Director on Absolver, and we're about to see some exclusive Absolver gameplay. So Absolver is an online action game with a focus on a very easy but accessible melee combat system. So the combat in Absolver is inspired by actual martial arts, and we wanted to create a system that was deep but accessible, and in which players could create their own custom combat choreographies. What we're seeing here is a tutorial map in the game. It's very early stage. The player has not been matchmaked with other players yet. The main part of the game is set in a small open world that is made of a dozen interconnected zones that the players can explore freely, and in which he or she is matchmaked with other players seamlessly. So as you explore the world, you will get to meet other people and build relationships with them. You can make friends, enemies, you can find mentors or students. A variety of relationships exist. And as we see here, sometimes you'll be walking in the world and suddenly somebody else is there. This, however, is a single-player tutorial because it's there to teach the player the basic game mechanics. So we wanted to do a combat system that is pretty accessible, so it's easy to pick up and play. It's a 3D real-time combat system, but we added enough layers of depth, as we'll see, to have an actual competitive PvP experience. Because the endgame of Absolver is becoming the best Absolver and fighting others like you in PvP. So here we see that the special defense of that character. In Absolver, every player can choose a combat style, and each style has a different special ability. This combat style has the parry ability, so the character is able to parry attacks if he does it in the right timing, which I kind of messed up here, but we'll see it a bit later on. So that's one mechanic. Another, which we saw earlier, is what we call perfect attacks. So when you nail your attacks, your successive attacks in the right timing, the character will flash golden, which makes the attacks chain faster and stun the enemy a bit longer. So that's what we're seeing here. It's really an incentive to be in the flow of combat. Another game mechanic we're seeing here is the feint, which is cancelling the build-up of an attack to trick your opponent into doing a feint. So that's this black ghost we can see at times. So this is especially useful against human opponents. Once you feint, you get into this high-level mind game, kind of tricking your opponent into doing a dodge or a parry, and that allows you to follow up really quickly with another attack while your enemy is recovering. So that's once you kind of get to know the attacks of your opponent, that is something that is very important to tackle. So now we're going to see something that is really the core of Absolver, which is the stances and the combat deck edition. The idea is, in Absolver you have 4 different stances, represented by this diamond. In each stance you have a sequence of up to 3 attacks, which you see on top, an alternative attack, which you see down. The idea is that every stance starts in one stance and goes into another one. So for instance, here we're going to make a sequence of attack that starts front left and that finishes front left. I can go into training mode. I'm going to see that if I chain these moves and I keep attacking, they loop on themselves. But I could go ahead and change that and decide that one stance actually goes to a different stance. Here, my 2 front stances both loop on themselves. But the idea is that any attack always chains smoothly with the attacks that follow. So everything is fluid, everything is dynamic, and the action basically never stops. The same system works with weapons, so the player can pull out weapons as temporary bonuses, and when you take out a weapon, it's just a whole different combat deck that is now accessible to you. Weapons do more damages, but they can be temporarily disarmed. They can bonuses, you can get disarmed, as we just saw here. So pulling a weapon in combat usually gives an advantage to the player, but can also be dangerous if your enemy gets very offensive, disarms you, and picks up your weapon. So now we're going to see another part of the game, which is a bit later. We're changing characters, and we're going to focus now on the attack learning system, which is the core of how you will create your characters in Absolver. So in Absolver, as you explore the game world, you'll meet other enemies, whether they're NPCs or players. And when you fight somebody, whether it's an NPC or player, they attack you with an attack that you don't know, and you'll learn that attack aggressively. which is what we're seeing here. Here I'm using the Absorb ability, which allows me to avoid being stunned or pushed back by an attack, and that allows me to counterattack right away. So I do receive damages, but if I counterattack, my damages are mitigated. And when I use my special ability on an attack, I'm going to learn it faster. So here I see that I've learned a bit out of 6 attacks, and as you fight different enemies, you will progressively learn more and more attacks. And what you want to do is, sometimes you don't want to beat an NPC right away, but rather try and use your special ability tactically on that NPC in order to learn their moves better. Another mechanic this ties on is a social relationship with mentor-students. So what you can do when you meet another player is ask them to become your mentor. That way, that player will be able to teach you their combat style, and you'll be able to learn attacks faster than you would by fighting regular enemies. So here I'm trying to absorb the enemy's attack, not to kill it right away. There we go. I've learned some of 3 different attacks. Now this character here seems a bit more dangerous, so I guess I'm gonna be careful in the early stages of combat. Valid tactic is to kind of get to know the moves of your opponents. That way you'll be able to counter the opponent more efficiently. This enemy has a combat style that has avoid as special ability. So my enemy can sidestep, duck under my attacks. He cannot parry or absorb, but he can certainly make these very short and fluid avoidance moves that allows them to follow up really fast and attack me. Every time my attack is a bit too predictable, the enemy ducks under it. So I've got to be careful here, maybe get some feints in order to get the edge in combat. Here I'm taking another stance. My back stance, I know that I have a low attack that allows me to beat that enemy. The enemy hasn't picked up my sword, so I can go ahead, pick up that sword. My health is pretty low, so I'm gonna heal up and keep on exploring that zone. So we're not going to show too much of that zone here, but before we jump to PvP, we wanted to show a bit of the customization system of Absolver. The general principle is that every gear, every piece of equipment, and we've got 9 different equipment categories in Absolver, every piece of equipment has specific parameters of weight and protection. And so you're kind of making that trade-off between weight that slows you down and protection that gives you, mitigates damages, and sometimes gear protects you better against blunt damage, sometimes gear protects you better against cut damage, which is typically the damage that players get from weapons. So you're making these trade-offs as you equip, and all these equipment categories are fully compatible, so